accessing and navigating prognosis, user role and permissions. As discussed in the Creating User Profile video, the medic type under which a user's profile is created is the primary hierarchy in determining a user's access in the system when they log in using a user ID and password. Secondary to that user profile type, however, is the permissions under their user role, and then third would be additional user roles assigned to them. And that is the subject of this specific video. So again, I have logged in here as an administrator, and for this discussion, we're over here in the admin column on the far right. We're going to look at these top two choices, role and user role. Now, the role designation that we're going to look at is directly tied to the user profile or their medic type. For instance, a user profile set up under Medic's provider is role doctor. We discussed resources do not have login, so they do not have a user role. Medical assistant is considered medical assistant at the role level. Clinical staff is going to be under the role nurse. Admin staff is under the role staff. And there's additional roles that we will notice when we go in there. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the role lookup screen. And again, you're going to notice there's a lot of different roles here that we're not going to cover in this video. But what we're going to look at here basically are the permissions that a user has in conjunction with their default user profile or their medic type. So again, I mentioned providers are defined as doctor. Medical assistants are medical assistants. Clinical staff are nurse. And administrative staff are staff. Not to be confused with admin, which admin in this context is administrator. Staff is administrative, which, as we discussed in the user profile video, is the medic's admin staff. So for the purposes in this video, I'm just going to go ahead and open up nurse, which is the most common, to be quite honest, because the majority of practices seem to want the bulk of their staff to have clinical access. Now, obviously, doctors are going to be set up as doctors when their licenses are created under Medic's providers. But as we open up the nurse role, we'll notice here that there is a table along our left-hand margin that has access rights. And we have our legend here on the right that tells us we have an R for read, C for create, U for update, D for delete, and A for approve. Now, the ability to create or add new, delete, and approve, you will notice not every function has those pieces. Every function has at least read-only access. Many functions, if not most, have the ability to update, which means modify. So just generically looking down the screen here, we see that at the appointment module, we have it broken into the schedule screen, the work pattern screen, the vacation screen, appointment report, co-payment, and view. So you can give an individual the ability to read it, to create or add new, to update, delete, and approve at a modular functional level. The thing to keep in mind, however, is at this point we are on the role. When we are on a role, this is going to be every user created under that medic type. So for example, since we are looking here under role nurse, the permissions that we define will be systematically applied to every individual who is created as a user under medic type clinical staff. So within my practice here, my nurses, my office manager, a medical assistant, and a technician, all of these individuals classified as clinical staff by medic user profile are given the same permissions at a role level as a nurse. That's important to keep in mind because when we look at the user role next is where you start to get the hierarchy of super users. If you have a nurse manager, for instance, who needs specific rights to approve that your other nurses do not, that gets handled on a separate user role basis. And I'm not going to go through all of these individually because you can look at them as needed. But as you scroll down, you're going to see here the different checkboxes. If it is selected, obviously that permission is available. If not selected, then not available. And then, of course, here, the billing module, nothing is assigned by default to a nurse. Now, just by comparison's sake, if we go in here and open up staff, which is your administrative staff, such as front desk, they have options here for appointment scheduling, doctor's work pattern. They have access to demographics, patient register, legal documents, insurance, but not responsible person, which is the guarantor. That's tied to the financial aspect. You look here at the encounter, which is documentation. They can look at a lot of it. They cannot update it. So that is going to be the first level of hierarchy with a person's permissions. The role, which is directly tied to the user profile medic type, has rights of reading, writing, etc. Second hierarchical level then is the user role. Now, whereas the role, you're assigning permissions to the role, user role, you're now assigning roles to the user. So now we're going to choose an employee. And this is where you get into giving individuals more rights than another. So if you notice here in the middle, we have all 6 of our nurses. They all have the same basic set of rights, but now we know Adam is the office manager. He's a quote-unquote super nurse. So we need to give Adam additional permissions that the other nurses do not need. So when we choose Adam under user role, we can now give him additional roles, which of course has additional permissions. So now we're on the user role screen for a specific individual. So this time we don't have the permissions that we saw at the role level, but we have all of the roles to choose from. Now you'll recall when we were doing our role lookup, we had additional roles that I did not address beyond those that were directly linked to our user profile medic type. Those are known as quote-unquote no access roles. No access roles are created for the sheer purpose of creating these super user roles by giving these individuals role permissions that the other individuals who share their medic profile type don't require. In this example, again, we're dealing with Adam Glambert. He is the nurse manager. He needs the ability, for instance, to approve prescriptions, whereas the other nurses do not. He needs the ability, perhaps, of closing encounters, blocking time on the schedule. Things that standard nurses do not need, he does. So by going through the user role screen now, we can give him additional roles. Let's give him the ability of access deny, administrative access, blocking time. Let's give him doctor roles so he can do everything that a doctor does, since that is the choice within the practice. Notice we have one here called super nurse, and we'll just go ahead and save. So simply by selecting these additional roles, Adam has it, the other nurses do not. And then quickly just going back here to the role screen where we have our permissions defined. For example, I will open up that super nurse. Notice our super nurse is defined here as no access. It has different permissions granted, however. And if we scroll down here to where we had that CPOE prescription, we can give it approval rates. This way, whereas the standard nurses do not have the rights to delete and approve, anybody who now has given the user role super nurse, in addition to the standard permissions of nurse, will also have these additional accesses. And that is how you can continually give user profiles additional access. Now, the last thing I want to mention while we're here on the super nurse is this option that says include in mailing list. When it comes to distributing messages within the practice, as discussed in our composed message video, you have an option of addressing your messages to an individual or to a role. If you want to use the role option, you simply designate which roles you want to have that ability, and then every human that has been designated as that role will be included in the distributions of those email messages within the practice. So in review, our role permissions are defined based upon the user profile or their medic type. This is where you provide the rights are read-only, create, update, delete, or approve at an individual function level within a module. You also can designate whether that role should be included in the mailing list option when using the messaging system. You then have the user role function where you can provide specific users additional access beyond the standard permissions on their primary role. That concludes this video within the series. Please click the appropriate link below for your next step. If you'd like to take a quiz, you will receive your results in real time directly on the screen so that you can see how well you've done. If you answer incorrectly, the system will prompt you with the correct response. In addition, a confidential email will be sent to the education team to help us better serve you with our educational offerings. Second, advance to the next video within the series you're currently in. And finally, return to the video library main page. As always, feel free to contact us through the Resource Center or email with any additional questions or comments.